Hello, everyone. My name is Justin Warner. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Helping Employees Engage During Times of Crisis. I'm joined today by the President of DecisionWise, Mr. Matt Wride, Vice President of Consulting at DecisionWise, Christian Nielson, and the Vice President of Assessments, Dave Long, also from DecisionWise. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
So today we want to discuss how we can help individuals, especially as managers, what we can do to help our individuals engage in times of crisis. Currently, we have the COVID-19 situation going on, and we want to be able to understand what can we do to help them. Matt, can I just pass it over to you, and why don't we go ahead and give some thoughts around this?
Yeah, thank you, Justin. As you mentioned, we're going to have this be a bit of a roundtable discussion, focusing on what we call the other half of the invitation. And we'll explain more what we mean by that, but we're going to focus on what individuals do to engage, not just what organizations do. But before we get there, I want to have Christian talk about our old friend VUCA.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. VUCA is our old friend. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's an important thing to consider at any time we're talking about the employee experience, and especially during crisis, are times of VUCA, where we aren't able to necessarily follow the routines and the patterns that we're familiar with. We have to stop and think things through in a changing environment. And certainly right now, we're seeing the world in a time of VUCA as we enter some uncertain and uncharted waters as we deal with a global pandemic.
I think it's important, Christian, you taught me the power of labeling and having models. And what I like about identifying for everyone that we're in a state of VUCA is that it helps us realize, okay, we need to do things differently. I guess we're always in a state of VUCA, but right now we can certainly identify it, and it gives us the opportunity to be compassionate, but it also tells us that we need to do better in some ways. Let's start here. You have told us, Christian, before that you can't build engagement, at least not directly. And you talk about growing it. What do you mean when you use the metaphor growing as opposed to building?
Well, the reason you can't build it directly is because people get to choose if they are going to engage with an organization. And you can influence that choice, but you can't make that choice for them. And so I like the language of cultivating engagement because you're building an employee experience that is inviting people to engage. And that's what you're building. You're building that experience. And so it is more along the lines of cultivating, creating the right conditions for engagement to occur, but you're still making sure we're leaving room for that and understanding that employees ultimately get to choose if they're going to engage. So we are building, at any level in the organization, we're building a culture, we're building an employee experience, and really building that invitation for employees to engage, to bring more of their best selves, more of their energy, efforts, innovation, ideas, discretionary effort, that type of thing to their work.
Yeah, I really love the concept that you've brought to DecisionWise, which is that it's an invitation. Organizations have to think of it as an invitation, but it's also dependent on that individual choosing to engage. Dave, I want to ask you to talk a little bit about some of the work you've done in this area, which is understanding the critical moments. We have a model that we use to identify what we call Chronos and Kairos moments. And I was wondering if you could spend some time helping our audience understand the differences between Chronos and Kairos moments.
Sure. One of the things that you want to think about whenever we're addressing employee experience, of course, there are all those structural things, leadership things that we have in place in an organization that whether we think that we've designed an employee's experience, we have. Every organization has employees that are experiencing them every day. If you categorize, or if you think about when an employee might, when that experience is shaped, It's not really shaped in the day-to-day, mundane kind of details of the work that they're doing, although that's a part of it too. In most cases, what we will think about when we look back on our experiences, we'll think about high moments or peak moments of our experience. And we sometimes call those critical moments in employee experience or moments of truth in employee experience. And we can label those two different ways. If you look at kind of the Greek way of looking at time, there were two different ways that they looked at time. They looked at it chronologically, kind of the way that we all see time, by minutes, hours, days, weeks, etc. Or you can look at it as kind of critical moments of time that kind of that will crop up for people in their lifetime. So the more chronological time they call chronos. And so when we're talking about chronos moments, we're talking about things that are predictable, things that we know are going to happen in employees' time with a company. They're predetermined ahead of time. If they're predetermined, then we know that we can design ahead of time the experience for our employees. We can create, the right hiring experience. We can create the right onboarding experience, training. We can treat them the right way on anniversaries, during performance reviews. We can create an experience during all of these things. That's what makes Chronos Moments such a great opportunity for organizations to improve, is because Chronos Moments are really those areas that we can see coming down the road, and therefore we have the chance to design and really create the right moment for people. On the other hand, if we decide not to do it, then there's really not an excuse for us not to kind of design those moments that we see coming. On the other hand, when we're talking about VUCA, as we've talked about, or we're talking about times of crisis, we're running into these other moments, what we call Kairos moments, all the time. Kairos is translated from the Greek roughly as the right moment. And these are moments of truth that are inherently unpredictable. And they tend to reveal the underlying values and culture of the organization. So as you look at kind of our visualization of this, between the hire date and the exit date, we have no idea when exactly these moments are going to occur, but we know that they make a big difference in terms of the way that we handle them. So mistakes come up, a customer complains, we have people that are failing, we have personal issues that come up, we have workload, we have people having to work from home, we have worldwide pandemics hitting us, right? So these are Kairos moments, and they are an opportunity for an organization to give employees the right experience or a values-driven experience based on the values that this organization has espoused. And they are critically important for the way that an employee is going to look back and view their experience with your organization in the future. So this is one of those moments, and during VUCA, certainly we have that opportunity to look at this and say, how are we treating the Kairos moments? The hard thing about Kairos moments is because we can't predict when they're going to happen, we have to have been prepared ahead of time to deal with them. And so when we're looking at this from an individual person's engagement or experience with an organization, the way we might see it is by saying, how are we dealing with this individual in this time of crisis? And a lot of that is going to boil down to the individual one-on-one interactions between a manager and an employee. And what we're hoping right now, of course, is that we can equip managers with the right tools to deal with some of the uncertainty in their environment.
Hey, Christian, Dave used the term values driven. What is he talking about with that?
It's a great point. When we're in those uncertain moments, those Kairos moments that we can't necessarily plan for, we have to rely on who we are as an organization, who we are as a team, as a company, and our shared values. And so being able to, where something is unplanned and we're figuring it out as we go, we have to rely on those values. What do we believe? Sometimes those values are stated or espoused values. Sometimes they're not. They're less obvious. But having a sense of who we are and how the group thinks and what we all share and put priority on can help us make decisions as we enter these unknown areas. I think some good examples, some of our stated values at DecisionWise are around authenticity and drive and family. And so any response that we have during this time should align with those shared values around being our authentic self, having a drive for excellence, as well as as supporting family in terms of, our organizational family and also people's personal relationships outside of work. And so the values can help give us some guideposts as we enter those uncharted territories.
Thanks, Christian. Christian, we're going to kind of transition now and really think more about what our tips or advice we can give to the individual. But before we do that, will you talk about this concept of the 50-50 proposition that we talk about, and really maybe give some insights into why there's some responsibility on the individual to engage, and that it's not just always left up to the organization?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying about an invitation. The organization can do a lot to invite people to engage. They can create we as an organization can create a very compelling invitation to engage. However, ultimately the employee has to meet us part way. They have to decide, yes, I'm going to bring this extra effort. I'm going to bring more of myself. I'm going to care more. I'm going to emotionally commit to this work, to the mission of this organization. That is a piece where they have to meet us. And so that's where we talk about the 50-50 proposition. The organization builds the experience and creates some of these conditional, the environmental conditions, and the employee gets to meet us and engage and choose to engage. And so there's many reasons why they may or may not. Past experience, what their personal values are, might not align with the values of the organization. There's all sorts of things that are on that side of the fence for the employee to use as they decide whether or not to engage. But it's important to recognize that is an important part of this puzzle of engagement, is that the employee brings their element of choice.
Dave, I'm curious, in your practice as you advise clients, how have you seen individuals engage? How have you seen the other half of the equation kind of take place? Any examples you could share with us?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time when we look at engagement in an organization, one of the things we're trying to understand is, would a reasonable person engage in this organization given the experience that we've provided? Would a reasonable person engage? And what I've found is, most of the time, because I think there's kind of this innate desire that most of us have to engage in our work. We want to love what we do. And if we can't engage at work, we find somewhere else to engage. We'll engage in, I don't know, sports teams or community service or something else. We'll find something to engage in, because our base state is that we want to engage. And so, but there are certain work circumstances where we can look at it and say, look, a reasonable person, no matter what they kind of choose, would likely choose not to engage in this organization. And so what I've seen is, creating a really good invitation is going to get most of the reasonable people to say, yeah, I really want to engage in this organization. I really want to be part of this organization. That choice to engage, if you've got a really good proposition there, if it's a really good situation for people to engage, or a reasonable person to engage, and you feel like you can't engage, you might want to look at yourself. And there's ways that you can look at it. We can talk about different models we can look at and see, what are the things that I'm missing in order for me to be able to engage. One of the things we look at a lot here at DecisionWise is a model we call engagement magic. And magic stands for meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. And we say that you need those 5 elements, or at least some combination of those 5 elements, in order for you to choose to engage in an organization. So if there's a really good proposition or invitation that the organization has given you to engage, and you're having trouble doing it, you might want to look at, do I have meaning in my work? Do I have the appropriate level of autonomy? Do I feel like I'm growing or progressing on a day-to-day basis? Do I feel like I'm valued for my contribution? Do I feel the impact of the work that I'm doing? Do I feel connected to those around me, to the organization, to my manager? Those are the sorts of things that I would look at and diagnose if I'm feeling like I'm having a hard time engaging when everybody else is around me. And if those ingredients don't exist with this employer, in this situation, or in this job, I might look to either find a way to get those ingredients involved in it. But if I can't do that, then I might look and see, where is a place that I can engage.
Yeah, And Matt, if I could add to that, I'm glad Dave brought up the engagement magic framework. I think those elements are important to consider as we think and assess our own personal engagement. I think growth really illustrates the 50-50 proposition very well, in terms of a lot of times we're working with our clients and talking about, well, people have lower perceptions around individual growth. And we have a conversation around, well, who owns growth at the organization? Well, the organization owns a piece of it, providing resources and things. But ultimately, someone has to take accountability and ownership of their own growth and drive. And we can't force someone to grow and develop. We can create fertile landscape for that growth, but ultimately they have to take some sense of personal accountability to drive and move that forward. And I think that illustrates kind of the larger piece that we talk about with the 50-50 proposition and engagement as a whole.
Right. Great thoughts, guys. Well, what we have up here on the screen is just, we're going to give people a quick self-assessment. If you want to play along, what you can do is, look how we're going to score a quick assessment. I'm going to show that in the next slide. And then you can kind of get a feel for where you fall into the engagement spectrum, as we call it. So we're going to give you 10 statements, and you're going to score how you feel about each statement based on the scale that I have here. And then you're going to add that up. And so you can have a possible score of 50 or a possible score of 5. And so I'm going to go here, and we'll try to put a little graphic on with this webinar later, so you can get a resource. But you could take a screenshot of these questions, and basically you score yourself. For example, at work, I feel strong, energized, and vigorous. Am I a 1 and I strongly disagree with that statement, or am I a 5 and I strongly agree with it? You score each of those statements and then go ahead and sum that up. And when you do, it falls into what we call an engagement index or spectrum. We don't believe that you're either engaged or disengaged. We believe that it's a continuum, and sometimes you're fully engaged, and sometimes you're a key contributor, and you can move in between these buckets. Dave, will you kind of explain for our audience this spectrum that we use at DecisionWise, this engagement index, if you will?
Well, Matt, it's just like you said. We're not going to say somebody's either engaged or disengaged. It's not. We don't think it's a really binary situation. What we're thinking is, there are times when people are, kind of float between these different levels of engagement, but also that it's really hard to say just because somebody's not fully engaged and bringing everything that they can to work and spending extra time and effort at work, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're disengaged. They may fall into one of these other categories. So, for example, the key contributor category is somebody who's giving a very steady amount of effort, a very steady amount of work. They show up every day. They put in their time. They're not unhappy. They're satisfied at work. They may not be completely, gung ho and loving their job, and the ones that go out and get the tattoo on their shoulder, but they give significant effort to the organization. The opportunity group is sort of an interesting group. If you found yourself to be in the opportunity group, there's a strong likelihood that you feel like you're on the fence, that you are somewhere between engagement and disengagement, and maybe there's a strong sense that you want to engage or you're waiting to be engaged, but there's something that's getting in the way. Oftentimes when we look at that, we might see things like, I'm just a little bit too stressed right now to really feel like I'm engaged, or I don't have the tools or resources I need, or I just feel like nobody listens to me. And therefore, I'm kind of sitting on the fence. I'm not disengaged, and I'm still bringing myself to work, but I'm also like, I'm not completely bought into the organization. What's interesting, when you're in the opportunity group, you can really go one of two ways. It's unlikely you're going to stay there for very long. You might end up deciding, I really don't want to engage in this organization, and fall into a more disengaged category. But there's also the possibility that the conditions or circumstances might change in a way that you might feel, or you could change your circumstances or conditions in a way that can help you to engage in your organization. So that opportunity group's really a neutral group. They're not completely disenfranchised, but they aren't completely bought in yet. The fully disengaged group, unfortunately, is a group that is completely disenfranchised with the organization. They really, to answer all those questions and that you had on the previous screen, basically saying, I hate my job, I never, I don't get excited at work, et cetera, et cetera. Time passes really slowly while I'm there. I'd never look forward to coming to work. If you're in that sort of a category, you're either going to need to have a major personal or professional change within that organization in order to find yourself engaged there, or you might need to find somewhere else, some other organization where you feel like you can engage.
Right. Well, either way, take a look, and I think our point is find out where you rank and have a conversation with yourself, have a conversation with your manager, or if you do manage a team, have a conversation with them and see how they feel about things. But understanding yourself, a bit of self-awareness is part of being able to do your part of the 50-50 proposition. Tip number two, a focus on values and mission. Sometimes I think we think organizationally a lot. We talk about the organization strategies, and we talk about our plans, but we think collectively. But sometimes we have to assess individually both our values and what I call our value proposition. And here's just a little template that you could look at. But basically, you sit down and you do a self-reflection exercise in which you ask yourself, what is my role? What is the role I play? And then how am I doing in that? And what's my value proposition in that role? And when we talk to leaders about doing this at an individual level, we don't just mean what's your role as a marketing manager, or what is your role as a customer service support professional. We're talking about your role at home, your role as a mentor, as a swim coach, or whatever you do. Consider all of them, because we are trying to engage the whole person and not just a work person. And so this is another kind of self-reflection exercise that either managers can lead with their teams, or individuals can sort of say, okay, I get this, pull out a notepad, pop open OneNote or Evernote, or open up Word, and just do some reflection on this issue of what is the role I play and what is my value proposition. Okay, let's go on to the third tip that we have, which is back to this notion of VUCA. How do we limit it? And one of the ways we can is to use one of the 5 magic keys, which is connection. Christian, could you talk about the points we make here about ways to limit VUCA through connection?
Yeah, I think there's some really great examples of some things managers can be thinking through to help create connection, especially during this time or during any time of VUCA. Monitoring employee enablement, making sure that your employees have the resources, the tools, the information they need to do their job. Enable them to accomplish the work. Even if they feel connected, if they've got all the great engagement magic elements in place, if they can't get the job done, as Dave says, everyone wants to do a good job. They want to engage. They want to do their work for the most part. It's very distracting if they don't have the resources to make that happen. So consider that. Establish regular check-ins. That should be a fairly obvious one to create connections. A lot of us are working remote. Some of us for the first time. Our teams have moved into kind of this new landscape of remote work. Check-ins become very important. We've got a tool in a moment I think we'll talk through that'll help with that. But having some form of regular check-in with the team, one, helps with the flow of information, but also fosters connection. Reinforce your team's mission and value proposition. Let's, don't lose sight of what your team was created to do. What's our purpose? What are we all in this together to do? Not only just the KPIs and things at the team level, but how does that tie into the larger organization's success? What function or what role does your team play in helping the larger organization succeed and win? Looking for proactive ways to create social connection. I've heard some wonderful examples lately. I've heard of virtual happy hours, virtual lunch and learns, and ways for people to almost kind of tongue-in-cheek activities to use while we're in this kind of remote landscape. If that's the case for your team, look for some of the ways to kind of foster some of those connections. One thing our office has been doing is these scavenger hunt kind of picture things, ways to help us, kind of a lighthearted way to stay connected. So there's some fun things you can do to promote some connection. While some of us aren't in the same physical spaces, we don't have as many natural collisions as we did back when we were all in the same production floor or office. And so we might have to take a little extra effort to make those things happen. And then create and reinforce a shared vision. Again, this ties in nicely to our value proposition, our mission. But again, what's the vision for our team? What are we all committed to? What's our shared long-term plan and identity as a group? And connection, I mean, especially during VUCA, during any kind of this uncertainty, connection is important. We want to feel the humanity of those around us. We don't want to just be thinking through operational efficiency. We want to feel like we're part of something, part of a team, part of an organization, and that we care about that and that the organization cares about us. And so some of these little things can have a big impact on someone's sense of connection with their group.
Thanks, Christian. So Dave, we're going to kind of talk about a tool, a little skunkworks project that we at DecisionWise put together. But let's talk about the best practices that underlie the tool. Walk us through that.
Well, let's just start out with whether or not you use a tool. It's important that you're checking in regularly. Christian mentioned regular check-ins with your people, mentioned that should be obvious, and it really is obvious. You need to be checking in probably more regularly than you have been in the past. And when we're thinking about how often, when you're all co-located under the same roof, how often a manager can check in with their team on a day-to-day basis, you might be checking in way more than you think you are. You're walking by desks or offices, you're poking your head in, you're running to get coffee together, you're doing all kinds of things that are these little informal check-ins that happen. So try to systematize putting in some informal check-ins into your process right now as you are working remotely. The other thing is, when we're talking about the actual kind of the one-on-one meeting that you have with your employees, a lot of the times we can, as managers, leave those to be a little bit unstructured. And I'm certainly guilty of that myself as a manager. Leaving those check-ins, I have them every week, but are they really structured? Are we really getting the value out of those check-ins that we possibly can? And particularly now that everybody that I'm working with is remote, or all my direct reports are remote, it's hard for me to really see the evidence of what they're doing, what they're accomplishing, for me to then talk to them about it in our weekly one-on-one. So a really good way for a manager to approach this would be to gather some information prior to your check-in, to your weekly or monthly, whatever you're doing. I would probably encourage you to do a weekly check-in right now. Gather some information from your direct reports, some questions to ask. What are the major tasks you're working on? What are they trying to accomplish this week or next week? What do they have on their plate or their calendar? What are their accomplishments? What have they accomplished over the last week? What are they proud of? What are the things that have really given their jobs impact over the last week? What are the roadblocks? What are the problems they're seeing? What are the impediments to them doing their work that exist for them right now? And how can you help in order to remove those roadblocks? And then what are they learning, or what would they like to learn along the way? Having your direct reports answer these 4 questions ahead of your one-on-one can really give direction to the conversation that you're going to have during that one-on-one. You come there more informed, and you come there more prepared to help them through the tasks they're working on, the learning that they would like to accomplish, and also to remove the roadblocks that they're encountering.
So, as I mentioned, we did a little skunkworks project. One of our partners is a technical wizard, and Dave, Christian, and I, those of us, including Justin on here, we put our heads together and we said we need to do something that we can give back. And so this tool is completely free. It's available to anyone in any organization right now. It's just in English because we did this quick and fast, but we believe that it's done well. This is the login screen where you would go, and at the end we'll have a link where you can go and go to a landing page. It talks about the tool and walks you through the registration process. But we call it the Manager Weekly Check-in, a one-by-one check-in, and it takes those 4 elements that Dave was just talking about, and it gives you some structure. The first part is assembling your team. When you come into the tool, you build a team, and you do that by essentially giving us their name and their email. Once you've built your team, then the system goes by itself. Every Friday, it sends out a reminder to them, and it asks them essentially to ask them to respond to those 4 questions that Dave just mentioned. What are you working on? What are your activities? Here, let me show you here, the icons on the left. What are your accomplishments? You can see the little trophy cup. What are the things you're working on? The task list. What are the roadblocks that you're facing? And what are you learning? And this helps make a richer conversation. And I think it goes to Dave's point that we get by a lot in having check-ins that are sort of unstructured, but just adding a little bit of this will help make the conversations more meaningful. Christian, why do you think that having this all in one place is helpful for a manager?
Well, I'm very excited that we're rolling this out. I'm using this with my team, and one thing it's just nice to have the same format and the same consistency to get all the information in one place. And so very quickly I can look at all of my direct reports and kind of how their week's going. And I've been trying to have some more organic touch points as well, but it's nice to have a structural process in place that's giving me this information consistently on a weekly basis. And I think my folks have welcomed the structure that it brings as they're out in the field where we don't have as much regular contact, that they know that they'll get prompted to provide this information. It gives you the exact format to send it in. And what's happened prior to this tool, Matt, I'm a little bit all over the place, but what happened prior to this tool is organically, as my team went remote, I was getting everyone's own interpretation of an update. And some people would give me some vague details, and some people give me novels. And I neither were helpful. And so what this has done is standardized it. It's given it a regular cadence, and it's given me one less thing I need to think about in terms of prompting my team. It comes out on its own. And so it's certainly there are other solutions out there, but this is a nice simplified version that's already adding a lot of value.
Right, and what's nice is first the weekly report's aggregated, so you see all of your team members in just one spot, so you can kind of see overall how the team is, but then you can go to each team member, and as they fill out reports, those appear and you can see their progress. So if the date happens to be April 6th, then you can see the next one that's a week later. It shows up on the screen, so you can track changes over time. You can see themes. For example, if someone is mentioning the same roadblock every time, you can address that. And so that's kind of the advantage of having something that does the thinking for you, sends out this request for the report, assembles it together in an easy to use format. This is mobile friendly. Your teams can answer really quickly on their mobile devices, and then you can have those conversations that are going to keep the connection going during times of VUCA. Dave, any last thoughts you want to talk about our little tool before we sign off here and give more information to the audience?
I think the one thing that I think that Christian really mentioned was where the value is here, and I would just like to second that, is being able to be very prescriptive with what we're going to be talking about. I liked how Christian mentioned, getting a novel or just getting a few sentences, neither one is helpful to you. What you want is succinct information that's going to help you have the right conversation with your employees at the right time. And I think this is going to help people to do that. Again, it's not going to solve every managerial problem that you have, but it is one of these things that it's like, you know what? I can get more out of my one-on-ones, and this is a tool to help you do it.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for hopping on and helping us just give some tips to our teams. Again, we want to iterate that the tool's free. You can share it with your friends, your family. We don't care what organization uses it. We just wanted to give something out there. You could go in and pause. They don't have to, once you start, you could pause it if you need to take a break. And it's just something that we're doing to try to kind of show our commitment to help organizations. We'll publish the link to where the landing page is, where you can learn more about how this tool works, as well as we'll publish the 10 self-evaluation questions and the scoring key that we presented, so that if you want to share that with your team members, or if you want to give that to your direct reports, you can do that. Thanks to our audience, and thanks to Christian and Dave for their work, and Justin for helping facilitate this webinar. And please contact DecisionWise, and we're always ready to answer your questions and help in any way we can. Thank you very much.